Steph Catudal is the author of a gorgeous memoir called Everything All at Once. And no, seriously, like my entire office passed it around until everyone had read it and wept, and each tear-stained page had been shared and joined by other people's tear-stained feelings. She is a beautiful writer and an even more spectacular person. Steph is also, not coincidentally, Canadian. So obviously we're soulmates. And even though now we both live in the US with our families, and dear listener, she is one of us. She is someone who knows intimately, painfully, that life sometimes just happens and that we have to learn to live alongside all of that pain and that joy and that love that somehow coexists. Steph, oh my word, it is such a joy to be talking with you today, finally.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I've been so looking forward to this. I was actually hoping I would get the email that you wanted me on your podcast, so I am so excited to be here.
Well, I'm so excited. I wondered if we could start with your husband, Rivs, does a ridiculous sport. Like, he's an endurance athlete, which means, so I've recently began running, so I can run for 12 to 21 minutes. So obviously very similar to what you're about to describe to me. So tell me then, really, what does it mean to be an endurance athlete?
Yeah, he is the epitome of an endurance athlete. I mean, it's not something he does, it's who he is. You know, he wakes up at 4 a.m. and he's out the door so he could run 2 to 3 hours before he gets the kids to school. And then if after drop off, if he still has energy left, he'll get on his bike and bike for a couple hours. It's really his way of making sense of the world, movement, you know, and being outside. So
it sounds like, too, the sort of contract between you is that he goes on these incredibly long runs, but then he always comes back until one day he just couldn't finish his run. Would you mind taking me back to that season and just telling me what happened?
Yeah, it was late June of 2020, so kind of the height of the pandemic, and it was kind of awesome for endurance runners because they could go out on trails and in the Grand Canyon and know it was there, so they kind of had this freedom, you know. And so he and a friend decided to do, it's called the Rim to Rim to Rim run, which is, I think it's 54 miles, where you drop down into the Grand Canyon, run across it, run up it, and then run back down and out.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. But it was a kind of a routine run that he would do, you know. He could even do it once a week during, you know, the spring and fall when it's not too hot. So he went down on one of these runs with one of his friends, and he kind of felt off along the way, but he didn't think much of it. He just thought maybe his electrolytes were off or something. He got back down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon by the Colorado River, and his heart started to race, and he couldn't catch his breath, and he felt that he was seriously in trouble, and he didn't know what was happening. And he just laid himself on a picnic bench and thought he was going to die down there. It was true. I'd never seen him panic. And when he came back out the next day, he was in a state of shock as though his body had failed him, which his body is his greatest ally. You know, he's an athlete. He's a professional athlete.
Yeah.
So yeah, he made it out of the canyon, but that was the start of everything.
That's so interesting to hear you describe it like that, like his ability to trust his own body as being like key to who he is. And you, I mean, you're learning to trust your own intuition on the day where you left, you know, a sick and claiming to be constantly recovering, insisting he was fine, Rivs, behind when you went on a picnic with the kids and some friends. But you had this intuition. And like that must, anyway, tell me about that intuition.
A couple weeks after that canyon run, Rivs like continued to decline. He got more and more ill. He lost weight. He couldn't get out of bed. And I was on my way to a picnic with my kids and my sister-in-law. And I was halfway there, halfway to the mountains. And I had this, basically just, it felt like an awakening. And it was like a whisper and a shout at the same time. And it just said, go home and check on Rivs. And I I pulled the car into a gas station, and I had my sister-in-law follow behind me, and I just got out of the car and I said, I need to go home. I know it sounds crazy, but I need to go home right now. And she held me and she said, it doesn't sound crazy. That sounds perfectly logical, rational, and true. And so I went home, and that's when I found him passed out. And that was the first time that I learned to listen to myself. That was kind of the beginning of my awakening, so to say.
When he didn't want to go to the hospital, was it just because it was just such a scary time to be in hospitals? Was it mostly because of that, or was he just like had confidence that whatever he was going through, he could just kind of muscle through?
I think it was a lot of things. The main was that we live adjacent to the Navajo Nation, and they're a demographic that got hit the hardest by COVID because their lack of accessibility to resources and stuff, sadly. And so the Flagstaff Hospital was just like a hot spot, and he didn't want to take a bed from someone he felt needed it more. And that's the truth. That was his main reason. He's like, I'm otherwise healthy. I'm a physical therapist, so I know triage, I know the body. And so I feel like I could do this at home and then save that bed for someone who actually needs it, who doesn't have the resources that I have. And then on top of that was the fear of, if what he was experiencing wasn't COVID, the likelihood that he would catch COVID in the hospital was very high at that time too. So there was a lot of things going into it that made him feel like I could just do this at home.
But then the state you found him in must have been just terrifying to see him that way.
Yeah. He looked unalive when I saw him, and it was really traumatic. But then he muscled through, and I finally convinced him that evening to get to the hospital.
To give like a sense of context of your, like the way you must have been thinking about it. I mean, you grew up Church of Latter-day Saints, like what some people might know as Mormon. And I wonder then, what was the faith of your childhood like?
As a child, church and faith were easy to me. It felt warm. It felt comforting. My mom would bring us, and we'd get cookies in church. And then, my dad would have lunch waiting for us when we got home, because he wouldn't come with us to church. He was never a member of the church. But they had a really beautiful, understanding relationship where that kind of religious difference didn't conflict in their marriage at all. It was really beautiful. But so I loved being Mormon as a child. It was easy. It was straightforward. And but when my dad got sick when I was 13 years old is when I started to deconstruct and question what I truly believed and what was true and what wasn't for me. Yeah. And a huge part of that was this notion of faith and miracles. I was led to believe that if I prayed and had perfect faith, that my dad would be healed. This very childlike XYZ equation of, faith and obedience equals miracle. And I really believe that, because that's kind of what we're taught. We're taught that. And when my dad passed away when I was 14, I kind of said, well, if faith and prayer and miracles aren't true, then none of it's true. None of it. And that's when I kind of started on my decade of rebellion.
I love the evil laugh. The evil laugh. That's so great. It's actually one of the first things I ever taught my kid when he was little was an evil laugh. Like he was like a 2-year-old who could laugh like Vincent Price. Which
oh my gosh, that's amazing.
It's so, but when you're locked into this, what our stories are so compelling. Like the seamlessness of the stories that we live inside are so compelling. And to have a dad with stage 4 lung cancer and then no framework for people who get sick and don't get better, that must have been like a totalizing world. Like you either live inside that world or you don't.
Yeah. Or conversely, when he did pass away, the rhetoric was, well, he was called back to heaven and it happened for a reason. And, you know, God needed an angel and all of the things that I know people say with good intentions, and they weren't trying to, you know, be malicious or vindictive, but those words, those platitudes killed me, because I thought, what better place could my dad be in than here with me and, you know, my mom and my brother and sister. And so that, I think that kind of made me really, really have resentment towards religion and the church, because it was all kind of encapsulated in this kind of telling me that I didn't have to grieve because my dad died for a purpose. And so just don't be sad. You'll be with him again. You know, don't be sad. And oh my gosh, that was really difficult to hear as a 14-year-old.
Yes. That's a very particular kind of poison.
It
is a rarefied kind.
Yes, it is. It is a very, and it lasts and lasts. You know?
Yes, it does. It really does. Yeah. Yeah.
Stays in the body. Yeah.
You wrote this, there are so many things that I highlighted in your book, but something you said about that was, I was full of hope when I should have been steeling myself for death. I lived on one end of the pendulum, oblivious to everything in between. And the feeling of just like, well, how stupid do I feel when I when no one prepares me, then when I have like nothing but my own sweet, unknowing.
Yeah. And I felt, I misguidedly blamed my mother for that, for, you know, leading me to believe in this chance of a miracle. But then interestingly, when my husband became sick and I had to lead my own children through grief, I realized what an impossible task it is to talk to kids about death and the possibility of death and illness. And it was this beautiful reckoning with her of realizing that she did, within the context of what she believed, she did the right thing. And it really was a very, it was just beautiful to see and empathize with what she had to go through and all the things that I blamed her for as a child. I kind of understood better where she had been coming from, you know, and in having to deal with the same things with my own children.
I'm just trying to think of just the desire to reassure, like where does the edge, where are the edges of how we reassure the people around us?
Yeah, exactly. And where is the meeting between hope and reality? You know, where do those meet in the middle? Because I felt like I was constantly walking that tightrope with my 3 children when it looked like my husband wasn't going to live. And do I let them live on the edge of hope only to be obliterated by reality like I had been, and then live in resentment like I had done? Or, you know, do I say he's going to die and then they blame me when he does live? You know, I feel like it's impossible. It's an impossible task, and we're just kind of clamoring our way through in those moments.
Yes, right. That's such a Steph, you think about that so clearly. I love your brain on this, because it's the precision of what you're trying to do there is. I find my brain breaks on it sometimes. The language of certainty I find to be really painful, totalizing, ignorant. You know, sometimes if it's just used as a weapon, this is exactly what's going to happen, when none of us can predict the future, right?
Absolutely.
And a lot of the language that I used to have for faith doesn't feel at all like certainty anymore. But when you can say the same thing, almost like the exact same sentence, like it's going to be okay, or, you know, and that kind of, and that just be a language of love, and a prayer, please God help this be okay, and hope. Okay, well, whatever this is going to be, we're going to figure it out as we go. It's so hard when the exact same thing can take us right to the edge of hope, but we're just trying not to let it push us beyond it.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting you say that, because it's true. I think what I realize is we're all saying the same thing. It's just semantics, and it's just the intention behind what we're saying. And what, I have a really hard time with certitude, just like you. I'm like, please don't. How do we know?
Please don't
how
hurt me
could
with
you
this.
know? Please don't. Yes, please. But I think the most closest I felt to faith or spirituality was when I could accept the liminality of all of it and accept that nobody knows, and how beautiful that is, because it means that anything's possible, good or bad, positive or negative. I love living in that space of possibility. And when someone tries to pigeonhole or be myopic about truth, that to me is a total I can't trust you when you say that you found the truth, because it means that you're not open to the rich realities that are around us and the varying realities, because anything is possible.
The in-betweenness is so painful and so beautiful for like a second. If you can, you can never stick the landing, I find. But I just wonder. I think it's really. I think the language is like grace, when we can extend to others like a kind of compassion that we can't totally imagine, but we can see love inside of. And when you talk about your mom, it feels like there's such a grace there for how her desire to will your dad into perfect health was a form of love. It sounds like it was a painful form of love.
Yeah, everything that she did was out of love, and that is something that I've realized over the years, that every prayer, every, family circle prayer, of every fast on Sundays, we'd fast for his health. In my teens, I saw those as just those made me mad, because I felt like they were just like false hope. That was just more false hope. And we were just doing this pageantry to try to, save my dad, and that it was all false. But now I see it all as acts of love. And then in my grief, in those years of grief after my father died, the freedom she offered me to express my pain and sadness in the destructive ways that I chose to. Maniacal laugh again. That was love too. I think she looks back sometimes and feels like she gave me too much freedom, or did she abandon me, or just let me go. But that's exactly what I needed, and that was that she loved me enough to be able to explore my anger and my grief in the ways that I needed, which I think is very hard to do. As now that I have a teenage daughter, I'm like, how did you not just lock me in my room? And you know what I mean? Like, how did you let me just go and be what I needed to be? Yeah. And that was one of the greatest acts of love that I've ever, witnessed, truly. And all of these things, there are only things that I've seen now in the past few years. These aren't things that were clear to me, as a teenager or even as a young mom. It's only in going through something similar, very similar to what she went through, that I'm able to see all of these things. And that's been one of the greatest gifts of this whole experience. If I could pick out the gems, this is one of them, is really seeing my mother in her fullness.
There was this one line that I underlined a million times that you said, what a blessing and a curse to learn in an instant that pain is the intercessor of empathy. I mean, what? That is so perfect. And I know there's all kinds of people in complicated relationships in this lovely listening community that we have that can find a lot of hope in that sometimes there's just a doorway we haven't walked through yet, in which we then maybe on the other side can see each other's love more clearly.
Absolutely. Yeah.